If we could encourage those coming in to sit in the two middle sections so we can create a kind of familial environment rather than have everyone spread off in their own corner. That would be wonderful. It has been almost 4.5 years since Jack Shorstein, Zichro Livracha, blessed memory, passed away. It was the week we read the Torah portion of Balak. Happy birthday. And in that Torah portion, the text relates how the prophet Bilam gazed from the top of Mount Peor and viewed the Israelites peacefully spread out on the land below. Moved at the sight, Bilam offered the following words that have become part of our liturgy: Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. In Jack's eulogy, I explained that the rabbis understood this verse to refer not only to Israel's physical dwelling places, but its spiritual institutions as well. And that when we hear the phrase, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, we can hear in those words an adumbration of another Yaakov, the Yaakov that was Jack Shorstein, who contributed significantly to the myriad achievements of the Jacksonville Jewish Center, even as he laid the foundations whose benefits we continue to reap as a community today. Knowing how he felt about this synagogue, and having had the pleasure and privilege of Jack's friendship and support for a decade, it is a great honor to hold the Jack F. Shorstein Senior Rabbinic Chair at the Jacksonville Jewish Center. I am grateful to the Shorsteins for this endowment, and thankful always for their confidence in affording me the privilege of linking Jack's legacy with my own role as senior rabbi. I pray to God for wisdom and strength in strengthening that linkage and bringing honor to Jack's Keter Shem Tov, the crown of his good name, in the years to come. The endowment of the Jack F. Shorstein Senior Rabbinic Chair includes the sponsorship of an annual memorial lecture in Jack's memory. Each year, the center features a program in which a renowned individual addresses the community about an aspect of the challenges and opportunities faced by Jewish leadership in our contemporary world. 2 years ago, we were privileged to hear from Daniel Gordis, and last year, or more than a year ago, from Rabbi Sharon Brous. This year, for our third annual Shorstein lecture, we are taking a slightly different approach to the topic of Jewish leadership. Torah teaches, Zechor Yemot Olam, Binu Shnot Dor Vador, Sha'al Avicha V'Yagedcha Zkenecha V'Yomer Lach. Remember the days of old, consider the years of past. Ask your father, he will inform you. Your elders, they will tell you. To be able to understand fully where we are today as a congregation, let alone where we ought to go, as we are currently involved in the Sulam process with the United Synagogue of helping to chart our future, certainly requires an understanding of the journey that has led us to the present. And there is one man who, more than any other, can help us chart that past that has led us to this present. From 1972 until 2001, Rabbi David Gaffney served as the spiritual leader of the Jacksonville Jewish Center and was both an agent of and a witness to the transformative period of synagogue history. It would be more than superfluous to introduce a man who really needs no introduction to this congregation, so I will simply express my delight at being able to welcome our own Rabbi Emeritus David Gaffney and Inga Gaffney to this evening, to the third annual Jack F. Shorstein Memorial Lecture, and to hear from Rabbi Gaffney about the journey that brought us here.
Some of my friends would say, disregard the fact that Rabbi Gaffney is putting his watch out on the lectern. But there it is. We'll have time for questions and answers and comments afterwards. What a magnificent room. And it's just wonderful to be here, and thank you for your comments, Rabbi Leonard. It's an evening of nostalgia in many respects, and there was a time that people thought that nostalgia was a form of illness, being obsessed with the past, but we now know that nostalgia is terribly important because it roots us. It gives us a sense of balance, tells us where we came from and who we were there with. And this is a wonderful opportunity, and I thank you for that. I want to begin by thanking the Shorstein family, Bud Shorstein and Judy Shorstein, Mark and Beth, and Michael and Robin, and the entire Shorstein family, for the opportunity to be your guest at the Jack F. Shorstein Memorial Lecture. Jack Shorstein, of blessed memory, was the president of the center in 1972 when I was invited to serve as a rabbi, which I did from 1972 to 2001. It was a pleasure during this period of time to be a rabbi when Mark Shorstein became the president, and Michael Shorstein following him became the president as well. Had the good fortune of having Buddy Shorstein as the president, who's also a close friend and advisor. And over the years, Buddy has shared his love of opera with us when he's come to New York. And his devotion to the Jacksonville Jewish Center and the Jewish community knows no bounds. The fact that Amy and I were able to be present at the wedding of Matthew and Debbie Shorstein a while back, and to officiate at the wedding and stand under the chuppah with Benjamin and Nicole Shorstein makes this evening very special. And the rabbinic adage, "V'hachut mishulash lo b'mheira yinatek," a cord, a cable, a rope that is bound 3 times, again and again, that cannot be severed. And the fact that we've had the opportunity to enjoy these experiences with the Shorsteins over these 3 generations is very important to me. My children told me, and they said to me, Rabbi, and they said to me, Dad. They don't call me Rabbi, and Inga definitely doesn't call me Rabbi. But they said to me, "Dad, I'm sure that you will be welcomed and embraced with an overwhelming feeling from the Jacksonville community, and it will leave you speechless." I said to them, "You were only half right." Those who share the fake news which suggests that I have a penchant for verbosity and lengthy dissertation be advised that I will try to review 29 years in a limited time, but determined to allow for some questions and answers following. I say this to explain that I'm not going to include names of individuals, 16 presidents with whom I served, countless lay leaders, chairpeople of committees, people to whom I was indebted for whatever success I might have had. And I'm sure I'm going to overlook events and issues and moments that were dear to you, but I hope we'll have an opportunity to explore those in the question and answer period. I thought long and hard as to how I wanted to frame my remarks, and it came to me a few weeks ago when I was giving a Dvar Torah for the congregation that I am still serving as a Rabbi Emeritus. It was the portion of Lech Lecha. After the story of creation and the story of Noah really begins the Jewish story, God speaks to Abraham and to Sarah, and he says to them, Lech Lecha me'eretzecha u'moladtecha beit avicha. Leave the land, this land, your birthplace, your ancestors' home, and go to the land that I will show you. Abraham, the rabbis tell us, was confronted by many challenges, which are described as the Torah proceeds to give us an account of his life. Rabbis were intrigued not by the word lech, go, but by the introduction of the Sidra and the words lech lecha. The word lecha means to you. And go to you is an awkward phrase. And it explains, the rabbis explain, that the most important journey one takes in his life for each and every one of us is a journey into yourself. Most especially when you reflect on your life's work and all it amounted to, it really is a lech lecha. Go and take the journey into yourself. So I want to spend a few moments with congregational life, but I want to conclude with the lecha, the journey of those 29 years into myself, into my life, the life that I shared with my beloved Inga. Inga and I are neither Sarah or Abraham, but we too left familiar surroundings. We left home, we left family, and came to Jacksonville. We knew we left Brooklyn, the car trip south. When part of I-95 was closed for construction, we took a detour on local roads and saw people picking cotton in the cotton fields, and a sign which read, "Impeach Earl Warren." We knew we left Brooklyn when we checked into the heart of Jacksonville Motel on Main Street. We went to Winn-Dixie to get some food for Shabbat, and we read the signs that said, "No service if you're not wearing shoes or shirts." The children said we left Brooklyn when all we heard was country music and couldn't get WQXR. Most significant issues, however, were a little more challenging. Someone pointed out that the morale of the congregation was very low at the time that we came to Jacksonville. The Jewish community, the conservative Jewish community, was divided. There were strong personalities in positions of leadership who had different visions for what they wanted for their congregation. We were concerned at the time of my arrival with membership retention and the adverse climate which existed in the community. We needed to make sure that our programs remained viable, and under the circumstances there were meetings and never-ending meetings. There were other challenges and other issues. The synagogue facility was in Springfield, and 3rd and Silver, the congregants and the community lived on the south side. The distance in different locations affected everything: Shabbat services, the schools, and all of our programs. High holiday services were held in the gym. There was a family service in the sanctuary. If you remember the gym at 3rd and Silver, many of our worshipers sat in stands that seemed to reach up to heaven. And when I looked out at that congregation as a new and as a young rabbi for the first time, it was a daunting scene. I remember becoming lightheaded and faint I did, or blacked out. And Jack Shorstein was at my side, and he picked me up, and I came to myself. The second Yom Kippur was different in many respects. It was 1973, and when I reached the synagogue that morning and was informed at the start of the Yom Kippur War, I remember changing my sermon spontaneously so that I might address that pressing issue. Coincidentally, when I began my tenure in the synagogue in 2001, the small synagogue where I served for some 15 years, it was Yom Kippur after 9/11, and I changed my sermon spontaneously at that time as well. Not only were Shabbat services affected by a community where members lived in the south side, and the synagogue itself was downtown. So it was a foundation school made up of 3 grades before it became the Solomon Schechter Day School and then the Martin J. Gottlieb Day School. Our Hebrew school and our youth groups and other activities were also affected by that distance. Inga and I and Asher and Shaw were spending Shabbat in Springfield in an apartment with a space heater, which did not heat all the rooms in the wintertime. And sometimes represented another challenge because our kids were spending long Shabbatot with social circumstances that were not ideal for them. Friends who came to visit for a while, but they were long Shabbat days. They couldn't wait for Havdalah and the opportunity to get home. More than anything, they missed the education that they had been receiving in high school. And a few years later, they asked whether they could return to New York. They were studying at a very intense Jewish day school and wanted the best of that Jewish education. Thankfully, his family lived in New York, and we decided to send our children away so that they could study. That was an Abrahamic challenge of another sort. Thankfully, the center was blessed with leaders with far-reaching vision. Property and land had been secured on the south side of Mandarin. The board voted a few years later to proceed with the plans for building. The yearbook of 1975 shows photographs of groundbreaking with the end towards building a new home. I remember that again there were long meetings which seemed to endure forever. The House Committee meetings and the finance, dealing with the challenges of creating circumstances that made our new home viable. Plans and blueprints were studied meticulously. I recall decisions as to where a stairway should be put, and how the door should be opened. Should it be opened this way, or should it be opened that way? And where the door stops were to be there. And again, I'm not mentioning names, but there were people who poured their hearts and their lives out to making this facility possible. At board meetings, we discussed the kind of facility we should have, what kind of architecture we wanted. There were those who said, let's go with the traditional synagogue with warm tones and wood, similar to the synagogue that many of us were familiar with. And there were others who recognized that the synagogue was to be built in a setting unlike any other, and the recognition that a modern building would be appropriate. And there were lay leaders who with devotion assumed the financial challenge, and through those years and the years that followed an evolving expansion of our synagogue facility. There were so many fundraising campaigns, I do not recall the names. I only remember partially some of them. The Shema Kolenu campaign, the Ein Breira campaign, there's no Fair Share campaign, the Restoration 2000 campaign, the campaign to complete the Jacksonville Jewish Center, the Last Mile campaign, and there were many times that people thought they were really walking the last mile. Look around the synagogue, friends, and you see names on dedication walls and different wings and rooms, and recognize how fortunate we are and were for the generosity of the core of loyal center families, and many, many members who, with their generosity, made this possible. Our Day of Torah was in January of 1976, and it was special. And that was when we moved from 3rd and Silver. There was a Shabbat service prior to that move on that Sunday, the last Shabbat that we would spend in Springfield. And on Sunday, leaders and members carried the Torah scrolls, the silver from the sanctuary, and hundreds upon hundreds of individuals met on San Jose Boulevard. At the time, it was the Beauclair Country Club, where the JCC, of course, today. And there was a flatbed truck with a band and loudspeakers and a congregation really of hundreds of people who were walking on San Jose Boulevard to our synagogue home. It was the most memorable day. Of course, this home was not yet finished. It would take some years. There were no pews in the early years, only our old leather chairs with springs which popped through the leather. And oftentimes when somebody sat down, they sat down and were greatly surprised at their seating. Our parochet, our ark covering, was a shower curtain. And the shulchan, the table on which the Torah was placed, was just that, a table. In the early years, you may not remember, there was a bathroom behind the Aron Kodesh, and services were often punctuated by an active flashometer. That was most interesting. That first day, the program, as people walked into the shul, and I have to tell you, I prepared meticulously and with great diligence, and to my great dismay, perhaps it was an act of sabotage. Hundreds and hundreds of people gathered in the sanctuary, and the sound system did not work. This magnificent building did not emerge in one fell swoop. It took many years. It was really a living organism. I spent days in New York with Ami Shamir, who did the ark and the design above and the dedicatory wall. And we were determined to challenge the members of our congregation as to which words of the Bible, which words of the Torah would appear on these lucite panels. And we described it, of course, as Jacob's ladder, with, as the rabbis say, with otiyot porchot ba'avir. The plan was that on certain times of the day, the lighting behind would be such that all you would see were the letters, and Jacob's ladder, of course, concluded with Jacob making the statement, Achim, Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, surely God is in this place. And we thought, surely God is in this place. We were now in a new facility where the congregation lived, and this made possible the expansion of our educational programs. At that time, we only had 3 grades in foundation school, which was problematic. The issue, of course, was how parents could integrate their children into a 4th grade private school or public school. And we concluded and we were determined that we'd expand our grades, which we did, except for a number of years in which our finances were such, and as it was described to me, today we were almost near bankruptcy and could not extend the Day School. Thankfully, that's not the place. It proved to be not the case. Our afternoon Hebrew school met, and hard work and education committee members who also served the day school at the time, discussed how best to make a 3-day-a-week school work. Do we want 3 days of Hebrew school and then expect the kids to come on Shabbat as well? Should we perhaps experiment and have that 3rd day of the school week take place on Shabbat? We knew that as a congregation that our greatest investment was going to be in our children. We wanted programs which would lead to strong synagogue skills. Young people at age 13, and certainly those at confirmation of their junior year, it was our intention to give them the skills to lead services, to read Torah, to chant the Haftorah, to lead Birkat HaMazon, to do the Havdalah after Minchas services and Maariv services on a Saturday evening when they were there for their pre-Bar Mitzvah event. On Shavuot, when they were confirmed, to chant Akdamot, to lead the holiday services, and on Purim to read from the Megillah. Our greatest satisfaction was always when our kids became adults, young adults, and then adults as well, that they could take their place in leading the congregation. And I understand that they are still doing that even today. I honestly don't think that there are many conservative congregations in which young people were given the skills to be able to do as much as kids did in our congregation. They conducted services as young members. I remember Cantor, Martin, and I negotiating. And I needed to practice the art of the deal. The Cantor, a professional, wanted to have his place on the bima, on the pulpit. We understood that's why he was here. But I tried to get him to understand how important it was for our students to display their synagogue skills whenever it was possible, and to be able to be comfortable on the bima. In a similar example, I remember a charged conversation I had with a member of a very prominent family who wanted his child to have a Shabbat Mincha Bar Mitzvah, which would lead immediately to the Bar Mitzvah party. It was a touchy period of time. These people carried some weight. I explained how important it was for all of our children to be able to conduct the most important elements of our Shabbat service, and we did not go ahead with that service. The education program, of course, was complemented by our youth program with a very special professional. And the program, the USY, Kadima, the Scouts, with such superb programs. We had more kids than I think any other conservative congregation go to Camp Ramah. And there was USY on wheels, which was very attractive. And there was Ramah in Israel. And there was Israel and Poland. And the thing that we insisted on doing is when the kids came home and were with us for the first Shabbatot after the summer, they played a very important role at services. They led services and they shared their experiences with us. We also had a wonderful relationship, I think, with our kids in college. I wrote to them frequently. I visited once or twice a year. They were again lay people that were the most precious to us, who saw to it that this was going to take place. The financial support for these programs began, and the effect was in the relationship that I find that I had in years past and even presently with kids who I connected with at school. I think it's clear that the congregation that has the day school really sucks all of the financial oxygen out of a congregation. And it was before an educational program such as ours came to rest on its stable footing. So there were these kinds of events to raise money for the children in our schools, the fabulous follies, the Muslim mania, the beauty pageant, the color raffles, the mock weddings, the not-so-newlywed game, and all with the purpose of raising money for our schools. We had a Tree of Life campaign, and a memorable Yom HaTorah where we brought a sofer, a scribe, to allow people to sign their names at portions of the Torah that were specifically special for them, to fulfill the mitzvah of Kitfu et Hashira Hazab, to write the words of this song, namely to be able to record the words of the Torah. Another issue which we had to address. One of my mentors who had an influence in my life and in my rabbinic career was Rabbi Mordechai Waxman, who was a rabbi of a very large synagogue, Temple Israel in Great Neck. I was installed in this congregation 13 years after I arrived, just note that. And Rabbi Waxman, as I said, had an exceedingly important impression on my life. I mention it only because Rabbi Waxman wrote a book called Tradition and Change, in which he tried to describe what conservative Judaism is about. It was about tradition, but it was also about change. The congregation, our congregation, was very strong on tradition. We were a little ambivalent on change. We were blessed with strong tradition, with a daily minyan, and it's just an absolute delight that there are people here this evening who know that they can come and say Kaddish, and we always were able to do that over the course of the years. We had captains of minyanim, we had Shabbat services were well attended, it was a feather in our cap, but it was unquestionably a strong statement about the kind of congregation that we were, that our congregation was, because of the presence of daily minyan. Where we were lacking was that the conservative movement was taking strides to integrate women in the ritual life and in the liturgical life of the congregation, and I was determined that we move along despite the fact that there were very strong contrary feelings of congregational leaders. I have to tell you that a late Friday evening service at 3rd and Silver, our old home, in which a young bat mitzvah would read the Haftorah on Friday night, and not on Shabbat, because she was not permitted to do so, especially when regular congregants were absent because we were down in Springfield, and the attendance was not made up of people who were regular shul-goers, but people who would come just for the bat mitzvah, and in many cases were just staring up at the ceiling as the service was taking place. It was not a service that I looked forward to with delight. In time, I began to tell the congregation that we were encouraging young boys to do the maximum, and we were asking young women to do a little. And what they were doing was inauthentic. Now, a 15th century scholar, the Radbaz, Rabbi David Ben Zimra, explained that the reason that the Torah is not punctuated with notes was to allow the wise to give their own voice to the text. And I was determined to give voice to that text. The religious meetings that we had were fraught with acrimony. I explained time and time again the Code of Jewish Law permitted women to come to the Torah. There was only one commentator who said, "B'medinatenu ein nohagim kain." In our communities, we don't do this because kavod hatzibur, because of the honor of the congregation. I said, we're not honoring half of the members of the congregation. There were religious committee meetings that I walked out of because I just could not take the tension that was there. We decided to make a change slowly, to proceed. I made a comment of Rabbi Israel Salanter, who said, a community that does not disagree with their rabbi is no rabbi. But a rabbi who's afraid of his community is not a man. Apologies to Rabbi Rosenblum. I explained, not a man, apologies to Rabbi Rosenblum. I explained that the maftir aliyah is not part of the 7 that tradition urges the maftir to read the haftorah, that the mitzvah could be that last aliyah not included in the 7. And in time, we made that move, and in time, of course, we would move to the full participation and to new understanding for Hatzibur, honoring the other half of our congregation. I remember writing in one of the center yearbooks that when we defined ourselves as a congregation, we noted that our synagogue was more than a place of worship, that we were a center. And a center should be a microcosm of Jewish civilization, of Jewish culture, of Jewish learning, and Jewish art. And if I can use my earlier analogy with Abraham, the Torah tells us that Abraham's house was open on all sides to welcome whatever currents, whatever views, whatever movements of his day. Abraham had a lot of relationship with surrounding peoples. He did not live in isolation. Jacksonville, my friends, at that time was not the crossroads of Jewish life. It was far removed from the large metropolitan Jewish areas and other communities. I felt that we couldn't remain Jewishly provincial. And we were, in fact, a talented, intelligent, informed laity, but the Jewish currents were missing. And with the help of a number of people and a few far-sighted women, and I mentioned the name of Sylvia Shorstein of blessed memory, we initiated a performing artist series and brought it to the center. Tova Feldschuh, Yefim Bronfman, and Shlomo Kalbach, and Achinoam Nini, and Mike Burston, and Yiddish Theater, and the Catskill Frolics, and Selma Diamond, and klezmer musicians, and Broadway Comes to Jacksonville. We were moved to invite serious Jewish thinkers to increase the vitality of our adult education program, to stimulate us. And whether it was part of the Setzer Levitt series or the Lou and Marilyn Shabbaton series, we invited Deborah Lipstadt and Senator Joseph Lieberman and Harold Schulweiss and Leonard Fine and Wolf Blitzer and Harold Kushner and Lawrence Kushner and Yitz Greenberg and David Wolpe and Emil Fackenheim and Abe Foxman and Dennis Prager and Joseph Tulishkin and Daniel Gordis and Malcolm Hellenlein and Neil Gielman, among many others. We were now plugged into the larger Jewish world, which come to complement the program. And we complemented that program with some serious adult education on a Sunday firing line to discuss issues and opinions of Jewish journalism periodicals, a Talmud class, a beginner's Judaism class, Hebrew reading, Shabbaton speakers, Torah study in people's homes, and with the help of sisterhood seminars, women in the Bible, and women and Jewish spirituality, and the sisterhood bar and bat mitzvah programs, which concluded with weekends of celebration with full ritual participation of members of the class. We determined that these efforts not be shallow, skimming over just major topics. They ran for 2 years, they ran for 3 years, and we covered the Siddur and holidays and Jewish philosophy and Jewish thought and Jewish beliefs. For young families, we initiated family counseling programs, Harayim, young couples, and so forth. Had gone to a convention and heard Rabbi Harold Schulweiss address a concern that he felt was important in his own large synagogue, a concern that large synagogues sometimes have individuals who lose a sense of community. He called it being a privatized Jew, and it touched a nerve because I had had a discussion with a member of our congregation about their child bar mitzvah and the kiddush which would be taking place following services. He was cognizant of the cost of the kiddush to a family, and he chafed at the notion that the entire congregation would be invited. And I remember his words clearly. He said to me, "What do they, pointing to the synagogue, what do they have to do with us? Namely, what did the members of the synagogue who come every Shabbat have to do with him and his family? That's an example of a privatized Jew. I have explained that there were other options. There was smaller kiddush, extended receptions for the family, but at a minimal, the entire congregation would be invited to celebrate their child's coming of age. Shuais experimented with chavarot in his synagogue to break down the institutionalization of a large synagogue, and we brought chavarot to our congregation. There were many over the course of the year. I attended many chavarot meetings and helped guide them in the things that they could study, the holidays they celebrated. We reinvigorated the men clubs, and they finally planned activities for men who assumed their congregation obligations. They recognized the achievements of school children with the Yad Shel Chai Awards, Golden Kippah Awards, and a lot of things to parallel the active participation of the members of our sisterhood. Someone said to me recently that it's a shame that the center did not find its financial footing and stability before I left. I said that before when I explained about the Solomon Schechter Day School, before we finally have the Galinsky Academy, the Dubo Preschool, the Martin J. Gottlieb Day School, the Bernard and Alice Sullivan Religious School, the Setzer Youth Education, all the things of the endowments that make this congregation possible. The funny thing is that just a few weeks ago, when I told somebody that I was coming down to Jacksonville to have this event, to participate in this event, he said to me, "Rabbi, how's your golf game?" And I said to him, "You know what it feels like to be a hamster in a treadmill?" That was never really possible. The congregation our size really becomes almost non-manageable without an assistant or associate rabbi. We had wonderful professionals in our schools and our youth programs, but the clergy work, really fell on my shoulders. So whether it was services and minyan and classes and meetings with Bnei Mitzvah and parents and board meetings and staff meetings, religious committee meetings and life cycle events, bris, bar mitzvah, weddings, funerals, community meetings and veilings, preparing for classes, writing bulletin articles, correspondence, preparing for sermons. It was not unusual for me to go to St. Vincent's Hospital to visit a member of the congregation, then travel across town to Memorial Hospital and find out when I left that somebody else was admitted to St. Vincent's Hospital, and sometimes I didn't dare allow a member of the congregation to feel that he was not visited by a rabbi. Our congregation earned a number of awards from the United Synagogue, from the seminary, and now, friends, just a few words about the other journey that I described in the beginning, the journey into oneself. It's really the most important journey one has. Harold Kushner was in this community years ago, and I met with him personally, colleagues, and he asked me this question. He said, "David, do you have nachas? Do you have satisfaction from your work? Do you have nachas? Do you have satisfaction from your life?" And this occasion moved me to reflect on Kushner's observation. Do I have, and did I have nachas? And I did, and I do, many times over, and let me explain. I was raised in a very traditional Jewish home. My parents were Orthodox. Family life was Orthodox. Shabbat was the most important day of the week. They were the germinal, important influences on my Jewish life and my values. The yeshiva that I attended was right of center, was a modern Orthodox. I remember during the years that I was studying close to rabbinical school, students in my class vilifying the Jewish Theological Seminary because of the Lieberman clause that conservative movement just introduced. I'd served, as I said, as an educator at Rabbi Waxman's Temple Israel School. He who had written Tradition and Change. And he opened my eyes to the organic nature of Jewish life. I began to take classes in Jewish philosophy. My dissertation was on Martin Buber. I was intrigued with the writings of the Rabbi Joshua Heschel. I was influenced by the classes of Robert Gordis, who explained that halacha, Jewish law, is never static, it's always developing. And I realized that I would be most comfortable as a conservative rabbi, but I needed to discuss this with this new path with my parents. And the decision that I would have, what I would do with my professional life. They told me the story of the Pintele Yid, you know, the story, the fact that every Jew, there is a little spark that has to be fanned and made a flame. And they said to me, go make that spark a flame. I was studying philosophy, and the story of Franz Rosenzweig became the most important philosophers in modern times. As a young adult, early 19th century, raised in a reform home in Germany, wanted to convert to Christianity. Many of his friends were doing the same thing, and he was prepared to do so. And he went to a congregation, and he realized the different world that a committed Jewish life could be. He became one of the most influential people of his time, and he was not moved to change from considerations of conversion to Catholicism, to Christianity. He was not moved by a sermon, he was not moved by a choir, he was not even moved by a kiddush. But he was moved by a community that engaged authentically in the fullness of Jewish life. And it was frankly that aspiration that I considered to the kind of community that I would like to create. Whether we lived up to this ideal, only you can answer. But I told Kushner, yes, I have a great deal of nachas in the classes that I taught. The people that came to me to assume a new identity, Jews by choice, the adult B'nai Mitzvah classes that I taught, the life cycle events of families, watching kids go from their bris to their bar mitzvah, to their weddings, baby namings. Young people who stimulated me with the questions that they asked in confirmation class. The privilege of sharing the simcha with people under a chuppah and being pulled in by a family member for a hora wedding. A young man who told me years after his bar mitzvah in a conversation how my comments to him before his bar mitzvah made him wear tefillin. And he's been wearing tefillin for all of his life. A young woman who wrote to me, she now lives in another community, a conversation that I had with her prior to wedding. And she wrote to me and said she decided to make her home a kosher home. That she and her husband were presidents of their own synagogue. The confirmation class that determined through a class project to raise funds for Ethiopian Jewry following Operation Moses and Solomon. A young woman who stopped me just a few weeks ago in the lobby to tell me that the bat mitzvah class that she attended as an adult was one of the notable things in her life. When a young child who was 3 years old came into the chapel on Friday evening, Kabbalat Shabbat, because I always promised her a ride on my knees. We, of course, don't do that anymore. Now she is a young woman, and she's working in New York, and she came to our synagogue in New York on Simchat Torah because she wanted to be there for Hakafot. She said she was working, but she had a 1 hour lunch break, and she knew that I was there. I wanted to celebrate Simchat Torah with me, so I gave her a Torah, and she was dancing around the synagogue, and we were singing Am Yisrael Chai, and her eyes were closed, and she was singing with fervor. When numbers of members from the former Soviet Union would see me on Shabbat and embrace me, and thank me for the education that we provided them, and for the bat mitzvah class that Jews from the former Soviet Union had and how much it meant to them. And they said, you turned a group of atheists into members of a congregation, you turned us into proud Jews. The hands I held when people were sitting Shiva on too many occasions when that life cycle was most difficult in the many tragedies we had here in this community, and thanking me for helping them come through it to pass through the valley of the shadow. And most especially to see young people whose brisses and baby namings I attended, and I was there for their bar and bat mitzvah and for the confirmation, and now taking the reins of leadership in this congregation as presidents and as chairpeople of important committees, willing and committed to make this congregation the kind of congregation it's been, and I have no doubt will continue to be. And come on Shabbat and see them sitting on the pulpit and hear the congregation singing the Dor Vador Nagid Alecha from generation to generation. We will proclaim your glory to God. If I had, with your help, something to do with making that possible, what greater nachas can I hope for? So thank you very much, friends, for being here and for helping me to feel the nachas that I feel, for being the warm, friendly, and outstanding congregation that you are. Yehuda Halevi said many years ago that we are all prisoners of hope. And when one considers what happens in synagogues in this day, and the challenges of one kind, and the challenges of making our tradition a viable tradition for the generations that follow, and knowing that you are in the company of wonderful religious leadership, I have no doubt but that the word hope is central, and that we will continue to have nachas from each other. Thank you very much. My welcome, at least I'm told. And some of you may have questions, comments, memories, or things that you would like to add. Please.
I'll have the microphone so everybody can hear. So if you have some questions.
Comments, memories. Things I forgot. Kathy, you never trained a microphone.
You know how much you mean to me and my family and those and have dreams from far and near. And right now we have one grandson in the new preschool, and it's like so amazing to go and see him doing Shabbat. And I remember every single thing that's ever happened to us in the synagogue. And most of them are new because I usually didn't know that I don't come so often anymore. But we would have never come. And we're very proud. I just said to Mrs. Spriggs over here, because we have a Hamarah. And we just started 4 years ago or so. The church started, and our whole, most of us are here. And we're all your disciples. And we really are. So we love you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Somebody else?
Go ahead.
I just want to know one thing. Why are we married?
all in.
I'll interject a question. Looking at some of the changes that you have seen in conservative Judaism and the movement of the movement, what are your thoughts if you were entering the Rabbinic now? Or let me ask that a different way. What thoughts would you, that's a very good question too that we were just asked. Would you, you can choose to answer this any way you like, but what are your thoughts about the future of conservative Judaism?
That's an interesting question. It's a very complex question. We probably need another weekend or so to discuss it. I will say with every fiber of my being that I think that conservative Judaism is traditional Judaism. That it is what I think Judaism was supposed to be. There are many changes taking place. In some places, places of worship have become non-denominational. Issues is not conservative reform or orthodox. There are new religious expressions that are being found, and maybe New York is a kind of laboratory. I'm sure California and other places are as well, but I see that all around us. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the movement. The movement may not be quite what the movement is now. There may be some shifting and so forth. I think we also, when members of Orthodox communities tell me in a fashion in which they express with pride where they are and where we are, the truth of the matter is that the Orthodox community is not quite what there's no unanimity in the Orthodox community as well. You can go from Chabad and Haredi to modern Orthodox, open Orthodox, and the like. We've pushed the envelope, certainly with progressive Orthodox congregations with regard to such things as the prenuptial agreement, which even Orthodox rabbis do with a greater role that women are playing in their congregations, and some rabbis who are even ordaining Orthodox women. There's a great deal of shifting. And I think fundamentally a conservative congregation has to reflect the image of what conservative Judaism is, authentic and real and passionate and devoted. And there are fundamental things that we should be doing as conservative Jews. And I think the kids that somehow either stray or find greener pastures elsewhere are doing so because they find that we are not as authentic as we should be. I think we have to reach out to individuals. The ways that Chabad, for example, reaches out to people, they are so skilled in a modern technological world. They have resources which I guess we don't have. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. I wish I had a simple answer, but fundamentally, I think our course is the right course, tradition and change. But we just have to be truly conservative Jews. We cannot be just conservative Jews in name because we belong to a conservative shul. And we have to model that in our daily behavior, in our Shabbat, in our Jewish lives.
Elena. everybody here in the chair with me can.
When I look at this ark, I remember the first time we came here. The walls all around were with silver foil.
Or what?
Silver foil.
Walls were silver foil.
Yes.
Yes, the ducts were silver foil.
On the top, it wasn't white. It was silver, like God made it. Like, you know, the way it was like plum. I remember looking and they asked me, how do you like the synagogue? And I said, it's beautiful. When is it going to be finished? And they said to me, it is. And I felt really bad, but I want to apologize now to all of you. The second memory is looking at this beautiful ark. In the front, there was Aron HaKodesh, the ark. In back, there was a toilet. The toilet there were steps. And the steps would go all the way up, like the Jacob's ladder, except those were steps. When you got to the top, you said, this is the office of the cantor. Later to become Dov's office, who inherited the couch and everything else in the room. When the kids came for meetings, they loved it. They came into this old couch, they sat in, and they disappeared. So, those are the memories that I remember from the place that I'm right now.
One more thing about the ark. I'm sorry the doors are not open. The question was posed to me by Ami Shamir, what it was that I wanted to have as a curtain of the Aron Kodesh. I said, for me, one of the most moving prayers, and I have to tell you, my obsession is with a prayer book. I neglected, for example, to point out that we took many trips to Israel with members of the congregation. Just a memory. I thought that was an enlargement upon their knowledge of Jewish life and Jewish events. We had a member of the choir in our congregation who sang a solo, an old man with a very soft voice. And he sang before Shema Koleinu, V'haviutin el har kachi, I will bring you to my holy mountain. V'simachtim b'veit tfilati, and I will make you rejoice in my sanctuary. Ki beiti beit tfilah yikareh l'chol havli, because my house shall be a house of the Lord forever. This gentleman went to Israel with us, with his wife. An older man, an older woman. The Mount Olives at that time was still accessible to Jewish tourists. So we went up to the Mount Olives and we looked down, and I called him by his name and I shook his sleeves and I said, what you have been singing about all of your life is right there. Look at it. He broke down. He broke down. He cried. All of life suddenly took on a meaning that it didn't otherwise have. He spent a few rehearsals and so forth singing with the choir. But there was one verse that he sang that he didn't know what it meant. And he saw it. And suddenly, just everything kind of opened up. I will never forget that moment. Or once when we were going with the Federation. I'm not sure whether it was Israel's 50th anniversary or not. It was the 50th anniversary, the 30th, and it was in March. We were marching down King George, and we were going to then go to Yaffa Road and go to the wall, to the old city. And we were walking just like robots. And I said to the people program. It turned out that Jacksonville was the first group. And I said, we need to sing. We need to sing. And I began to sing, Yasis Alai Elohayich, Kimsos Chatana Kala. And then I said, Achomotayich Yirdavid Kadati Sharim, Kol Hayom V'chol Halayla. On your walls, we have placed watchmen who will watch over you day and night. A verse from Isaiah. And as we walked down Jaffa Road, and we looked up at the walls of the old city, and the young Israeli soldiers were standing there with their Uzis to protect the American Jewish visitors who had come. And I said to them, do you see what you're singing? You and Isaiah are singing the same songs. You see the soldiers up there. There's something that comes from the 8th century before the Common Era, and you see it today. Do you understand how time is eclipsed by a visit to Israel? Or taking a group of members of the congregation, one of our congregational tours, and we took them, they came to the room, our room in the Plaza Hotel, and we had a room that overlooked the old city. And the song that's heard on Monday, it was, we gathered for Havdalah, and the song that we read on Monday, Sobu Tzion V'Hatifuha Sapru L'Peleha, L'man Sapru L'Doracha. Walk all around Zion and encircle her, count her ramparts, examine her citadels, and then tell the story to later generations. And I said, look out of this window, and you see the citadel, you see the towers. This is the city of Zion. Tell the story to later generations. The ability to take a text and the ability to take something which is part of life and to merge the past and the present in a moment, in a visual moment, was the most special. I don't know how I got off on this tack. I just wanted to say how important it was for us for the prayer book. That's where, frankly, I find my inspiration these days. I love to examine the phrases of the Siddur. One that came this past week was Chol HaChaim Yedu Chasel V'Yalu Et Shemcha B'Metre Baruch Atah Adonai Atov Shemcha L'Chana Elodah. Blessed are you, God, your name is good, and it is good to praise you. Fitting. I've been obsessed with what the word for the name of God means. When we say, you brought us close to your name, what does it mean, you brought us close to your name? And then I saw a commentary which said that the word Atov Shemcha means that's what God's name is. God's name is Tov, that it's good. And that's what I understand as God's name, that it is good. And I wish that, as I said, that people would understand with depth the meaning and the significance of the Siddur. Don't know whether we have any other.
We have time for one more or two more questions or comments. We can keep them brief. Herb and then Shirley.
On a lighter note, that is something my friends do. I do want to apologize to you for making me very nervous before Simchas Torah. I'm never sure what we will do. And I know
What? Shirley, give him the microphone. And if Shirley's apologizing, I want to hear it. That'll never happen there.
Every Simchas Torah, you got a little bit nervous. What are you going to do this year? And I do apologize on behalf of some of my friends. There was one green suit that you wore that you never wore again. So I'm so sorry. My friends agreed. It was wonderful following the holidays because we got a lot of material. Thank you.
Better late than never.
Shirley, I don't wear that green suit anymore.
Herb.
I, like a lot of people here, have been sitting in awe, just reflecting as Rabbi Gaffney talked about his experiences here when he came here. And all I can say is, like a lot of people here, we have so much to be thankful for in our life, things that we just take for granted. But I've got to say that this community should always be thankful and grateful for an individual that came our way and made this community the start of what it was, how great we are now. And it didn't come overnight. It came as a result of the efforts of just a wonderful, wonderful individual who gave of himself. And all of us can sit here and reflect how personally we all have been touched by what Rabbi Gaffney gave this community. I honestly hope that Rabbi Gaffney and his beautiful wife Inga and their children know only novice and secrets in their life, and may they enjoy everything in the very best of health. Thank you for all you have done.
I can't think of a better note on which to adjourn for dessert reception. You're all cordially invited to join with Rabbi Gaffney and with Inga as well, and to continue the conversations. Erev Tov, good evening, thank you all for coming, and drive